Hello info people, it is Genevieve, and in this video we're going to learn how to draw water. And this video is part of a digital art course that is designed as a month-long YouTube series, so it is totally free. And you can definitely choose to only watch this one specific video if all you care about is how to paint water. Or you can take on the challenge of improving our art skills by drawing along with the community every day. And if you want to do that, make sure to check out my website where the full schedule for the entire challenge is going to be. And also make sure to subscribe as well as ring the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming textures that are going to be part of this course. All you need for this tutorial is some sort of a digital art software, and I will be using Procreate on the iPad Pro. But you can definitely use pretty much anything that has layers in it. So Photoshop, Corel Painter, Krita, Affinity Designer. Honestly, most mainstream, and not even like that mainstream, digital art software will do for this tutorial. I will be suggesting just really basic digital art brushes, so basically the one that come with your software, they're definitely gonna work. And I will also include a free color palette in the description below, but otherwise you can pick your own colors if that's more what you're into. And if you are watching this video in the course, you also need to set aside, I would say, 15 to 25 minutes, depending on whether you are on day 27 or 28 of the program. And with that being said, let's start drawing. So the first thing you will want to do is to create a new canvas, and the size is totally up to you depending on what you're using this illustration for. If you're just practicing, I recommend something like 2000 per 2000 pixels. I also recommend setting your background to a neutral color if you're just practicing. So if you have the color palette, any of the grays on the right hand side are neutral grays. Otherwise, you just pick a gray that you like. And we're going to start this tutorial by creating all of our layers all at once. It's going to be done. It's going to be out of the way. So let's do it. The first layer you're going to create is going to be renamed to base, and you're going to lower the opacity somewhere around 80% because water is not, water is kind of transparent. The next layer you're going to create is going to be a clipping mask. This one, you're going to rename it to bottom, and you're going to leave it as is. So the blending mode is normal and the opacity is 100%. The next layer is also going to be a clipping mask. You're going to rename this one to layers and also leave it as is. The next layer you're going to create is also going to be a clipping mask. And what a clipping mask does is basically everything you draw on those clipped layers is going to stay within the shape of the base. So that's super helpful and helps save a lot of time. This new layer, you're going to rename it to shadows, you're going to change the blending mode to linear burn, and you're going to lower the opacity around 80%. You're then going to create another layer, also a clipping mask. This one you're going to rename it to light, and you are going to change the blending mode of this one to overlay and lower the opacity around 80% or so. The numbers honestly don't matter that much, so don't worry about being super precise here. You're then going to create yet another layer. This one is also a clipping mask, of course. You're going to rename it to highlights. And the blending mode of this one, you're going to set to add. Add is a very powerful blending mode, so go ahead and lower the opacity pretty much around 50%. The next layer you're going to create, of course, it is a blending mask, or a clipping mask, I should say. This one you're going to rename to waves. You can see here I'm struggling because my handwriting is not super good apparently, but anyway. And this one, the blending mode is going to be normal, and you're going to keep the opacity to 100%. And with that, we're ready to start drawing. So go ahead and select a medium blue as well as just the brush that you're used to working with. And on your base layer, you're going to draw a circle if you're following the program and you're on day 27, or otherwise you're going to draw any surface that you want your water to be. So you're just drawing the silhouette at this point. You don't want any texture or anything like that. You want a solid shape. Once that is done, you're going to draw the bottom of your water on the bottom layer. In my case, I'm imagining that it's like the ocean or something like that. So my bottom color is going to be the color of sand. If you're drawing a pool or something like that, it would be like a very bright turquoise. That's kind of the classic pool color. But if you want to draw sand just like me, that's what I would recommend. So you just pick a very bright orange, beige type of color. And you're kind of really roughly sketching this crescent moon shape in the bottom. And with the smudge tool, I like to use it as like the stucco brush, but you can use pretty much any smudge tool that you're used to. You're going to refine the shape. So very roughly sketch it at first. I do recommend that you keep a little space between the bottom part of your base and this bottom layer, so the bottom edge I should say, as you can see here, because it just makes the final piece look a bit more interesting that way. So it's a very simple little trick. But otherwise you can draw pretty much any shape that you want, and you can really take your time here. It's not super complicated, but make sure that you have something you like, and make sure also you have something that is a bit out there. So you don't want something too perfect, because water kind of distorts the shapes. So you definitely want to make sure that your bottom is not like super smooth. You want to make sure that there's some movement in there. So once you have a shape that you like for your bottom layer, we're going to move to the layers layer. And basically this layer, you're going to pick a deep blue color, and the brush really doesn't matter. And you're going to paint on the areas where the water is either the thickest or the deepest. Because water is transparent usually when it's like perfectly pure and clean, but otherwise it kind of layers together and gets darker and darker, and there's less light that goes through it the thicker it is. So that's what we're doing here, and you can even layer some super dark blue. And once you're done with your really rough scribbles, go back to your smudge tool and just smudge it in. Again, you want to make sure that you have a lot of movement, so you don't want anything perfect here. Once more, make sure that you're just going really quickly, quite rough, to build more texture in your water. I know that sounds weird, like texture in your water, but believe me, that's gonna make a big difference if you do have that like movement in your blending, as opposed to something perfectly smooth, like a really perfect, like textbook kind of gradient. You don't want that, you want movement. Yeah. Once that is done and you're satisfied, you're gonna move on to your shadows layer. And it doesn't really apply in this situation, but you would pick a grayish purple type of color and a super soft like brush, like a airbrush or round brush. That's usually the most basic brush that comes with any digital art software. And you would draw the shadows from the environment. So if there was a boat on your water, or like a floaty or something like that, that would cast a shadow, that's on this layer that you would draw it. Since we're just drawing a sphere, we're going to draw kind of a crescent moon shape in the bottom. And if you remember, or if you watched the tutorials about metal, we're going to use the same technique, which is to erase a tiny little line on the edges of the sphere to help the shadow kind of separate a little bit from the background, or to help the sphere separate from the background, I should say. So it just adds a little bit of contrast, not having the shadow go right to the edges. Great, now that we have our shadow, we're going to move on to the light. So for the light, select the light layer, you guessed it, and you can go with pretty much any bright bluish or greenish type of color, and the same soft brush that you've been using. And you're going to draw some very smooth, super subtle, super soft spots of light on your water. And I really recommend you actually draw a few spots, not just like one big blob, because that really helps with the feeling of water in the end. You can also move on to a lighter color to highlight some of the spots even more, but we're going to do that in the next step, which is going to be the actual highlights. So speaking of which, go ahead and select your highlights layer, and with your same brush, your same color, you're going to highlight quite a lot in one section. If you're drawing a small body of water, like a glass of water, it's going to be a fairly defined highlight. Otherwise, you're going to gently brush over a bigger section of your piece, and the edges are probably not going to be as visible. They're probably going to blend in and be quite smooth. So at this point, you should have a pretty good base, but it looks a bit flat. So go ahead and select your wave layer, as well as a super bright greenish type of color. And with your same brush, so the soft brush, you might want to lower the opacity of it a little bit, like around 80-90%, and lower or decrease the size. You're going to draw some wobbly little lines over your piece. And yes, there is this water brush that comes with Procreate, but you can see here it looks a bit weird. like it doesn't blend in really well because it's kind of a flat texture, and here we have something that is three-dimensional. So with your same soft brush, again, like I was saying, you're going to draw some really soft, wavy lines that follow the form that you're drawing. So here it's a sphere, so we're gonna have something that curves around the sphere, as well as just has some really nice movement and curves within the line itself. And I really recommend that you start very simply, so with lines that are kind of going in the same direction. So that way it's really not super overwhelming. You're just basically drawing squiggly lines that are facing the right or the same way. And once you have a basic pattern that you like, you can decrease even more the size of your brush and start adding lines in different directions. So you want to break apart the waves a little bit. So the first step is to draw the main waves, and then you kind of draw the movement and the water between the waves. And there's really no rule for this step, so you can definitely just let loose, have fun, experiment, and draw some fun, super organic curves over your piece. The one thing that is really helpful though is to make sure that you, from time to time, decrease the size of your brush so that you have different sizes of waves. Another really cool thing is you can add multiple lines. So when you have your main wave pattern, don't be afraid to go and add little secondary lines that kind of follow your main waves. Another cool thing you can do to add more dimension is to go with an even brighter version of your color, so almost white, and go over the areas where your waves connect. So where they crash together, usually it would be even lighter, so almost white. So that's a little secret tip for you. That little extra step is going to make a big difference, even though you wouldn't necessarily be able to pinpoint it. Believe me, it's kind of the secret to making this piece look good. Another little pro tip is to add some dots and smaller lines in some of the corners between your waves. And it just makes the piece feel like there's a whole lot of movement. There's almost like foam between your waves or something like that. So at this point, we're really almost done. We're just gonna add a few extra steps that are going to make everything feel a bit more polished. So we're gonna create 2 more layers below everything, so below the base. The first one you're going to rename to Drop Shadow, and you're going to change the blending mode to Multiply or Linear Burn and lower the opacity around 60%. And the second one is going to be renamed to Drop Light, which I know sounds a bit weird, but bear with me here. This one you're going to change the blending mode to, let me see, lighter color, there we go. And the opacity is going to be around 60% as well. So going on your drop shadow layer, you would select a grayish purple type of color, and with your soft brush you would draw the shadow that your sphere of water would cast. On your drop light layer, you would select the base color, and you would kind of imagine that there's light coming through the water, because again, water is kind of transparent, and that would project this bluish type of color on the ground behind the sphere or in front of the sphere, depending on where your light source is. And it's super subtle, but it makes a big difference. And if you're drawing like the ocean, of course you would have those 2 layers, but if you're drawing like a glass of water or like a glass pool or something like that, these layers can be really cool and really help blend your water and the scene around it. So there you go, this was how to draw water in pretty much any digital art software. If you are following the program, make sure to come back to this very video for day 28. So today was day 27 and we're just drawing, like practicing the texture. On day 28, you would draw water again using the exact same technique, same steps, but this time in context. So a pool, a glass of water, something like that. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up because it really does help the channel. And before you leave, don't forget to subscribe because I put out new videos like this one every week, especially during the month of January, where we're going to cover a total of 13 different textures spread across 5 teams. So make sure not to miss that, and I will see you soon.